These days, it's common for religion to be viewed as a private matter, something you do in your personal life that shouldn't be brought into the public square. But new research shows a powerful link between religious participation and positive outcomes in vital areas of public life.
Just being in that sort of environment and being part of those communities, uh, the outlook is different. It's stronger. The families are stronger. The extended families are stronger. And by extension, the communities are stronger.
On this episode, I sit down with two experts to explore whether religious participation actually has positive benefits for family stability, education outcomes, and health and well-being. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. This year, Sutherland Institute is celebrating its 30th anniversary, thanks to all those who support the work we do for Utah and our great nation. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week I want to pose the question, does faith have a role in public life? It's something that's often debated through various political and cultural lenses. We're going to talk about that and some new research from Sutherland Institute on the topic. To have the conversation, I'm very excited to welcome into our studio Bill Duncan in the room with us, our Constitutional Law and Religious Freedom Fellow here at Sutherland. Bill, thank you.
Nice to be with you again, Nick. Thanks.
And in our virtual studio, Sam Abrams. He's an AEI scholar and a Sutherland Institute visiting scholar, also a college professor. Sam, thanks for being with us again on Defending Ideas.
Thank you for having me, and hello from New York.
I'm excited to talk to both of you guys because, Sam, you recently authored some new papers for us here at Sutherland through kind of three different domains of sort of the positive ripple effect, I guess, of religion in various domains of life, and Bill, it's something that you write about and speak about often. So I'm going to kind of pepper both of you guys with questions, but I want to start out with setting some context where one of the dominant narratives in the discussion about the role of religion in public life for many years has been sort of a broad decline of religiosity in the country across various demographics. And then even just within the last few weeks, following the assassination of Charlie Kirk here in Utah, there have been some reports from some news sources or some religious organizations saying they're seeing a spike, that church attendance is up and Bible purchases are up. So there's some really interesting trends going on. And with that context, kind of setting the stage, I want to ask both of you to help us understand the role of faith in public life, even if sometimes the trends ebb and flow and people's participation or attention to religion changes. And maybe to start off, Sam, I want to start with you because, again, we have three new reports. This is a series coming out from Sutherland. We'll, of course, include links in the show notes to all of those reports. But three new reports that examine the positive impacts of religion on family life, on education, on health and well-being. I want to start with family. And Sam, maybe starting there, that I kind of want to pose the question, are families more fragile today in the United States than they have been in years past? And if so, what did you find in the paper of religion being able to help fix that?
Sure. So if there's a silver lining to Charlie Kirk's horrific assassination, and under no circumstance do I want to glorify that or say that it was even remotely appropriate, but, as a Jewish person, I often look for the silver linings and things. And the recent spike in interest in faith and some of his teachings, which is get married and have children. This is a very good thing for not just Utah, for not New York, but for our country, and quite frankly, for the world. The fact of the matter is that we have data that we have been able to look at for almost a century now, and it shows very simply that faith, and I don't mean necessarily the act of prayer. There's a huge value to the act of prayer, but faith as an institution. So the places we go to pray, the people we pray with, the communities in which we engage around faith. So folks that we celebrate religious holidays with, folks that we celebrate life cycle events with, a birth, death, mourning, and so on. They all are, quite frankly, glue or lubricant, however you want to think about it, that keeps society together, that keeps the wheels of a healthy civil sphere working and connecting very, very strongly. So the fact of the matter is, as you'll see in the report, metric after metric after metric has shown that those who are more religious have bigger and stronger families, and the long-term outcomes for these folks and their families are often quite positive. Um, the fact is they are often more content in their outlook. They're happier. They feel far less alone, far less isolated. They're struggling less. They feel like they're part of something bigger. They feel like they're part of a community. They don't feel like they're anomic and just bouncing around. There is a purpose, a meaning in life. And that's a lot to say, but people have been studying this now literally for decades. I'd say almost a century, believe it or not. And some of the original sociologists, whether it's Durkheim and others, observed this many years ago in Europe. And the good news today is that when we look at these ideas about the elementary forms of religious life and what being religious does, and again, it's not necessarily prayer or scripture or Bible study, and we can talk certainly about that, but just being in that sort of environment and being part of those communities, the outlook is different. It's stronger. The families are stronger. The extended families are stronger. And by extension, the communities are stronger. And it was thrilling to do a deep dive in this data because it was just consistent time and time again. And very rarely do we see such strong results, but it is there and it cuts across almost all faiths and all communities. And it's a very powerful finding.
Sam, a quick follow up, and then Bill, I want to ask you a kind of a question about something Sam mentioned about belief versus practice and those kinds of things. But Sam, first, I've often said that in various conversations that if I could wave a magic wand, if I had to pick one sort of social intervention that I think would make the most difference for outcomes later in life, the thing that I usually pick is that I want every child to be raised in a married two-parent household. That there's overwhelming data on the family front that has benefit. When you look at this through the lens of the sort of religious practice as a protective factor for strong, stable families, what do you see? What's kind of again, maybe there's no such thing per se as a silver bullet, but what's the one big takeaway that we all need to know that, well, this is, if you want strong families, this is the impact that religion in general can have on that?
Yeah, if you want strong families, take your kids to synagogue, take your kids to church, become part of one of these institutions. The benefits are hard to overstate. I grew up in a religious congregation called Beth Tefillah Synagogue in the western suburbs, not western suburbs, rather, the western part of Philadelphia. And I did not realize how lucky I was. I was in a diverse community. I knew a ton of people from all walks of life. There were college professors and doctors. There were lawyers. There were teachers. There were mechanics. I never felt alone. When I had questions, whether I needed help with a math problem, I'll never forget this in high school, or I needed help fixing my bike, I didn't have to go to a store. I didn't have an anonymous transaction. I knew people in my neighborhood and everyone was there and everyone stepped up. I have a close family friend the other day who had a little daughter. And when she introduced me to her then boyfriend, now husband, my jaw hit the floor. He was a young man who grew up in the same congregation as my own. And within a fraction of a second, I said, we understand each other. I know him. I think the world of him. And it's been a great relationship. And these are those values and the family connectivity and the community that is created around here. So to me, that really is the biggest intervention. If I could wave my magic wand, I would say get involved in a religious community. Again, prayer is important. Scripture is important, but it's the the sort of external benefits to just that, the community and support that you get through family connections and just larger community connections.
Bill, I want to ask you a version of a question I actually asked you at an event a couple years ago, where kind of drawing off of what Sam was saying, that what I think there's a common trend, certainly in my generation today, of, well, I don't need to be religious. I can be spiritual, or I can just be a good person. And I want to ask you is, what, in your view, is unique about the role of religion in supporting and strengthening families that's kind of unique to that institution? And my sense is that it's more than just sort of the social club aspect. These aren't just social clubs. There is a communal element, but that's not the only thing. What would you see in Sam's research and in your own research that bolsters that?
What a great question. I've wondered that same thing because I've looked at the same research Sam described so perfectly. And what struck me is that It really is participation more than identification or anything else. In fact, in some ways, we see a sort of an odd development. If you look at research on divorce rates, for instance, people will sometimes say, well, religious people divorce at the same rates as others, or even more in some cases. But that's not really the case. The reason it's not the case is that is based on the assumption that religious identification is enough. But religious participation, like Sam was describing, really does make an enormous difference. And over time, the gap between religiously observant people, religiously active people, and those who aren't, it seems to be widening on a number of areas, obviously divorce, whether people get married at all, whether they have children, all of those things. So, but your question has to do with why would that be? I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to take a cue from some things that Sam has said that I think are probably really helpful. One is that I think we see an example around us. One of the things that we noted in the research is that people who are actively religious are making the decision in favor of family earlier in life. They look forward to having more children. They look forward to marriage. They make decisions that make those outcomes more likely rather than less likely. And so to me, that suggests that in their communities, they're seeing examples of faithful marriage, of strong families, of attentive, warm, authoritative parents, those kinds of things. And so it's easy to sort of see yourself in that same situation. I mean, I think related to that, again, as Sam described, is there's just a natural support. In a congregation, if you're struggling with a challenge, you almost surely will have someone else in the same family challenge specifically that's been through or is going through the same thing, and will say, don't give up. That was the same with our child a couple of years ago, and I was having a conversation with my son a couple of weeks ago. And we had precisely the conversation that Sam described. We were trying to think of all of his uncles and aunts and my brothers and sisters, and how much we just kind of, if you need car help, you go to this person, and if you need suggestions about everything, you can almost always find someone within a family setting and within a congregation, and both of those together are such a powerful mix. I think I just agree with everything Sam said, but hopefully that's responsive to your question.
Well, one follow-up and then a final word from you, Sam, before we go to break. But if I'm interpreting what you're saying, Bill, is that the difference is really essential between just identifying as a particular faith and actively practicing. So would it be fair to say that those who actively practice a faith in an organized religious setting, do they have lower divorce rates, greater marital happiness, and that's distinct from just those who identify as part of it, regardless of practicing?
Correct. That's right. That's right. And that may be helpful for people who maybe are unfamiliar with this research to recognize, because you may see something sort of gotcha studies. Oh, look, down in this part of the country where there's a lot of religious people, they have many problems too. Well, of course, everyone has problems, but the resources to handle problems, particularly family problems, are associated with religious participation. So actively attending church, actively engaging with the congregation makes a difference. There are some areas where just spirituality is important, like Sam described, and we'll probably get to those later. But the robust results come when people are actively engaged.
Sam, we need to go to break in a minute, but I want to ask you, we're talking about the effect of religion on tending to lower divorce rates, have greater marital happiness. Are there other things that you saw in the data that you think, well, there's a pretty straight line between religious participation and these specific data points that strengthen families? Anything else we're missing?
Children. Just the fact is more children and the benefits of having those children. And one thing we don't talk enough about, and it's not in this report, is that children ground you in ways unimaginable. A quick story. We just finished up the Jewish New Year holiday, Rosh Hashanah. There is a tradition that a certain segment of Jews do during that holiday for a whole host of reasons. I hadn't done that in almost 20 years. My son learned about it completely out of nowhere and said to me the other day, or asked me the other day, if I could do it with him. Without any hesitation, I said yes. and I broke this 20-year history of not engaging. It was sacred. It was beautiful. It was something incredibly special. And I just want to highlight that, we don't have great data on this, but I would say that uh, the children give it back to you, and they give it back into the community a million different ways. Educating them through whether a formal school or a Sunday school sort of model, it doesn't matter. They contribute so much more by simply asking the questions, making us introspective, and asking us to think very deeply about our own communities and our own faith, values, and ideas. So the research, we don't have good data on that yet, but it's certainly something that I want to mention because we have space to do that here.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the sort of the intersection of religion and education. Again, another domain of public life where it's kind of that's another silver bullet or magic wand thing. A lot of people say, well, we just need to strengthen education for the next generation. That's the thing. So maybe another area where there could be some overlap with the social good of religion. So let's take a quick break. Again, we're talking with Sam Abrams and Bill Duncan. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation with Sam Abrams and Bill Duncan about the role of religion in various domains of public life and some of the downstream benefits that probably don't get talked about too often in public discussions. But before we continue, I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, please visit defendingideas.org. You can find this and previous episodes of the show. And you can also subscribe wherever you get your shows. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube, where you can subscribe to the Sutherland Institute YouTube channel. And if you're watching, make sure to click the bell icon on your screen there so you get notified each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. Again, wherever you get your shows, just search for Defending Ideas and hit subscribe, or visit us at defendingideas.org. Sam and Bill, I want to shift gears and talk about the role of education, because it's another report in this kind of mini series that's coming out now. And Sam, I maybe want to start with you. That I think we, in public policy conversations, we talk about so much that education is the key variable, is the silver bullet. Again, I might say it's family, you might say it's religion, others might say it's education, but really all these things are kind of integrated. So I want to ask you, what did you find in your research about how the role and the presence of religion in public life has a positive impact on just the way we teach our kids?
So one of the things that we didn't mention in the earlier segment is, what are the actual values that faith and certain belief teaches us? And, I focused primarily on sort of the institutional positives, such as community and support. But one of the things the report finds is that religious institutions, or rather most religions and systems of faith, promote education and inquiry. This is a core belief system. And if you look at so many faiths, they've set up an incredible network of kindergartens, in many cases, elementary schools, high schools, colleges and universities. Some of our best colleges and universities are sponsored or were organized by different faiths. Brigham Young in your neck of the woods, Yeshiva University here in New York. I grew up right next to St. Joe's University in Philadelphia, which was a Jesuit school founded in the Jesuit worldview. One of the things that becomes very clear when you study or look at faith and the values of faith is that they like education. And not only do they like education, they are open to disagreement and dialogue. I can't stress that enough. Far from being dogmatic, and yes, certain schools do have certain principles they live by, and that's a choice if you go there and you have to follow them. The fact of the matter is, almost every faith believes in viewpoint diversity, and they encourage dialogue across difference. And I can't stress that enough. Some of the best schools for that are like Brandeis University. Yes, there are certain places that you have to keep kosher. Yes, it has a pro-Zionist orientation, sure, but it also is incredibly respectful and encouraging of difference and dialogue across difference. So when we think about religion in the public sphere as it intersects with education, rather than see it as something that should be separate, we should see it as a force that promotes education. And here in New York, when you think about where do you send your kids, yes, there's some private schools. There are certainly public schools, and then there's an incredible network of faith-based schools, and they do incredible work. So I guess the takeaway would be, rather than see religion as some closed-minded, narrow set of ideas where you worship a god or something else, the fact of the matter is, if you want to promote education, look toward religion, because religion is not opposed to it; it's supportive of it, and is a place that not only anchors people with values, but then encourages debate over those values. Jews relish the idea of Hillel and Shammai, and we have books and books and books, many behind me, that basically feature arguments, because that's how we learn and grow. And it's very clear that people who tend to be more faithful tend to believe that's absolutely in the data. They like dialogue, they like debate, they like discourse.
Bill, it sounds like some of what Sam's describing are things that we need more of today, just in our political culture, our civic culture, where if folks are worried about echo chambers, we're already getting that in our online news consumption and sort of the political polarized boxes that people find themselves in. And I think one of the things that's an outgrowth of that is this pretty intense debate over ideas of like the separation of church and state. And I want to ask you, not from a legal standpoint, but from sort of a cultural standpoint, that I think, again, just from my perception, there has been this modern view that, well, religion is something you do privately in your own church or synagogue, in your own home. And when you come into the public square, you kind of leave your religion at the door, so to speak. And it seems like there's ample data showing not only is that not accurate, it actually is very limiting to the role that faith can play. How have you seen that? Because I know we've talked before about the role of religion in our public institutions, either today or at their founding. How would you articulate that is a value that people need to be reminded of and bring with them into these conversations?
Yeah, I love that question. And the one of the things that struck me most when I was looking at data about universities in particular, but primary and secondary schools too, that are religious, is that they provide a really, like Sam described, a needed diversity in the way that we look at education and other factors as well. But I want to think about education for a minute, and I think it goes to your question about, well, how does this affect just public life? Like how does it impact people who are not religious? And one of the things that I think is most powerful is that because religious motivations are different from other kinds of motivations, or to be maybe more concrete about that, because public schools have a different set of considerations that they're sort of operating by than religious schools, they're likely to do different things. And some of the things that religious schools are doing are precisely answering, or let me say directly answering, some of the concerns we see just in education generally. To take one example, one of the major problems in higher education is completion. People start college, but they don't complete college. Religious institutions or schools that are operated by religious institutions or with a faith mandate have an advantage there, because all of their students who subscribe to even in a general way, even in kind of a very basic way, to the values of that institution, have a commonality immediately that makes belonging a little easier to develop. There are other examples too, in terms of introducing people into school who you don't come from a background of higher education in their family. Religious schools seems to do better in those things, and they're modeling new ways of approaching things like college completion, innovation in the way that they provide credits, getting underserved communities access to education. And And I think that the reason is because the motivation is different. People of faith often believe that they have an obligation to be educated, like Sam described, also to serve others who would otherwise be neglected in that process. These are you can't really replace that with just kind of better government programs.
Sam, I think one of the things in your report I want to ask about is sort of the effect on religious youth. So in an educational setting, is there a correlation with behavior, with academics, with like a civic engagement, and what kinds of things did you find that, again, tell us what the straight line is, so to speak, between religion and its role on the young people being educated?
Well, you had asked about is there a line for civic behavior, and the answer is yes, because they're a set of values, and the values are consistent across many faiths, which is don't be so selfish. There's a world bigger than you. How we define it and how we think about it differs by faith and view a little bit. But that idea that you are just part of a much bigger system is nonetheless really critical here. And in recognizing in many respects that you are small, which is why so many Jews wear a kippah, the idea is there's some higher power above you. The idea then is it sort of centers you. It makes you realize, okay, I'm part of a bigger system. How do I become a meaningful member of that crew? And it's very, very useful. As Bill was talking, I was just thinking about my undergraduate days and who some of my closest friends were. And they basically fell into two categories. They were either members of the Mormon Church, LDS, either getting ready to go off to a mission or coming back from a mission, or they were Catholic. And I really didn't have very many agnostic or atheist friends. And there were plenty at Stanford, where I was as an undergrad. And I found that I could not, and this is not a universal judgment against anyone, I want to be very clear. It's not that I couldn't talk to the atheists and agnostics. They just didn't think about things in the same way I did. Whereas when I would talk to folks who were deeply Catholic and faithful, and I would talk to members of the LDS community, we disagreed on quite a bit, but we agreed on quite a bit, and it led to the most amazing all-night conversations. We had a shared set of values, a shared set of questions and interests, and I wanted to learn from them, and I certainly feel that they wanted to learn from me. There's almost a willingness to be more open, to listen, and to then be heard and want to hear others when you feel comfortable at your very core and foundation. And again, just like with our last segment, I don't have great data on that. It's very hard to survey that. But over 21 years of teaching, I have found that my more religious students who have that sort of grounding and that core tend to be more open-minded, tend to question more, and tend to want to know more because they're not searching as much on a day-to-day basis, and they feel comfortable in their own skin and who they are. So I hope you don't mind that anecdote, but I think there's quite a bit there. When you feel grounded, you're open to being challenged. You're open to listening, and you're open to have more debates. And I think there's probably something to that.
We need to go to another quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk about health, kind of health and well-being, both physical health and mental health, because I think the thing that's on my mind in that category is the deaths of despair that get talked about so often, or crisis of meaning that I think you could connect to some of the mental health stats we've seen in recent years. So we'll get into all that because that is also the third paper in part of this series. So let's take a quick break. Again, we're talking with Sam Abrams and Bill Duncan. This is Defending Ideas. Stick around.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I want to remind you, subscribe to Defending Ideas wherever you like to get your shows, or visit us at defendingideas.org. Sam and Bill, I want to jump back into the conversation because the last thing I want to ask you about is the connection between religion and health. And it's the third installment in this series, Sam. And I want to kind of ask you to sort of describe the health challenges we're facing in this country now, and then sort of bring in, again, what you found in your paper and what you argue for, that why religion can be a protective factor for some of the problems we're experiencing on the health front.
Sure. So this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart because I see this with my students, and I see it on so many college and university campuses, which tend to have young people who overwhelmingly define themselves as atheist or agnostic, or as we talked about earlier, and Bill's absolutely right. They'll say they're Catholic or some form of Protestant or even Jewish, but that doesn't mean anything. They simply identify as such, but are basically isolated. And the fact of the matter is that we in this nation are facing a crisis of loneliness. People feel alone. They feel disconnected. They feel like they don't have folks to turn to. The report is very deep on that. Concurrently, they are addicted to these horrible machines here, and they are increasingly becoming more and more narrow and radicalized and isolated based on various algorithms that are, quite frankly, messing with their heads, for lack of a better way of saying it. One of the strongest anecdotes that I can give, if I were a therapist and had a prescription pad, which does not exist anymore in most places, I would write, join a synagogue, join a church, go to services. Again, not because of the prayer themselves. And the prayer, incidentally, and the report goes into great detail about awe and the value of prayer. So that's definitely there. But the immediate effect that you would get beyond just the ritual and the value of thinking about God in Scripture is, again, as we talked about, the community. When you are immersed in a community, you begin to feel seen, you begin to feel heard. Those feelings of isolation are much lower because you can't disappear. You're not going to be allowed to disappear. At some point, people might say, where is so-and-so? Is so-and-so okay? Can we check up on him or her? The idea that you are, just an atom floating in space no longer really exists when you are part of these communities, these congregations. The health and well-being factor really rises very quickly because rather than being isolated and alone, you always have someone to turn to. And it's not just a member of the clergy. It can be a member of the lay staff and the lay leadership. It can be someone who looks like you or sounds like you with a similar background. As we talked about earlier, many people have had similar problems in life, and you can feel like, hey, there's someone to talk to. When let's say you're a dad and you're struggling with being a good husband or a good father, to someone, you can talk to many other men in the congregation and the community about that. It's not a therapy session, it's a social session. And when you have those sorts of experiences, you walk out feeling like, again, you matter and you're part of something. The benefits to faith and the community associated with faith on health and well-being are hard to overstate. I wish that I could figure out a way to get everyone into one of these communities, because I think if that were the case, our crisis of loneliness would be abated fairly quickly. Then the second part of health and well-being is that, again, we are in a world increasingly looking down. We're looking at our phones, we're looking at screens. We're not looking out, and we're certainly not looking up toward the heavens. Faith helps recenter that. Faith helps us recognize awe, recognizes small moments that are beautiful, whether it's you're in a synagogue and you're disconnected from everything and the sun hits the window of the stained glass just at the right time, and then you go, oh my God. Or you're out taking a hike somewhere in a mountain and you see something as small as a bird or grand vista. Faith helps us center that. Faith helps us recognize, again, where we are in the grand scheme of things. And the report goes into detail about both factors, both the social component, but also the spiritual and sort of religious component as well. So we haven't talked too much about the religious side of it, but in this case, faith really does improve health and well-being socioculturally as well as spiritually.
Sam, are there any particular data points that stood out to you in your research on this that are striking? And I'm wondering in particular if anyone out there is listening to this and if they're kind of skeptical, that if they might say, well, some of the narratives in mainstream news coverage these days or on social media implies that religion is actually bad for your mental health. It may be in ways because it conflicts with other kind of modern secular narratives about a life and those kinds of things. So are there data points that can help refute that? What did you find that you think, well, this is actually pretty compelling in the evidence that makes a case for what you're saying?
So there's no question that faith can be dangerous, and I wouldn't suggest that it isn't. There are obviously some, but very small numbers of folks who become radicalized. Obviously, sometimes it becomes too cocooned and too inward looking, but that is the exception, not the norm. And we see that over and over again. Most faiths are open. Most faiths are intended to look into the public sphere and to be inclusive and to be welcoming. I would say to any listener, if you come to New York, email me, write me. I will take you into my synagogue anytime, ask anything, see anything. And if you are a stranger, there may even be a race to who greets you at the door that says welcome and who invites you to lunch afterward. And again, the compelling data points are when you ask about loneliness, when you ask about connectivity, when you ask about do you have the ability to talk to others, and do you feel like you have a friend in this world and someone to turn to. Those numbers are all up significantly. And I can't stress that enough. Again, there are always outliers, but almost all faiths, that are mainstream, have these positive goods to contribute to the public sphere.
Bill, as Sam is talking, something that stands out so strongly to me in a lot of the conversations we've had on this show, and especially in recent months, conversations about the well-being of men and boys, that's an active area of study for us and many other organizations as well, that so many of these things, I think, come back to the sense of connection and meaning and purpose, that there's a lot that government policy can do. That's, we work at a public policy think tank, right? We work in that space, but it seems like more and more, a lot of the really intractable seeming problems in modern society are problems of meaning, of purpose, of connection, and where do I fit in my life, in society? What am I supposed to do? It seems to me that the presence of faith and religion in public life provides an answer to that, especially when it comes to, again, I think a lot about the mental health well-being question.
Right.
Is that the right way to think about it? How can we, I guess, bring that idea more into the kinds of public conversations we're having about these issues where it's currently absent?
I think part of the answer is that sometimes there's some paradoxes in religion that are a little odd for outsiders, but they're pretty powerful if you kind of see the way there's kind of a providential economy working. We talked about one earlier that children, of course, need parents who are supportive, but adults really benefit from having children as well. They change them. It's a remarkable thing that both grow from that interaction. The same thing we see happening with the idea of what we believe, a kind of the orthodoxy. Do I believe the right things? And orthopraxy. Am I doing the right things? They also sort of interact with each other. They sharpen our beliefs. They help us to discard things that are not true, particularly in the way that we see other people. And so what I mean by that is that then if people recognize that what's really happening in religious communities, I think some of the skepticism begins to disappear because, like Sam described, it's relatively obvious that there's an infusion of purpose and meaning in life. There is you are surrounded by people who are not just like-minded. That's somewhat beneficial, but they're like-minded, but not too like-minded, so that you can see there's different ways of seeing things. I love that. I think that's exactly where we see these benefits. And I might just add that there are some powerful data related to outcomes with less depression, less suicide, less anxiety. Some of these these are things we're hearing about constantly, and for people of faith that they're a tremendous benefit. Having said that, one thing I always worry about is that we don't make it sound like a kind of an emotional prosperity gospel if we just believe that everything goes great. It doesn't. And that's another powerful element of religion that I wish people maybe who didn't understand or don't appreciate the importance of faith could see, is that we will deal with some extremely challenging things, including depression and suicide and anxiety. But faith allows us to navigate those challenges in ways that I can't see any parallel in other kinds of settings, and so I hope that these kinds of discussions are precisely going to be the answer to the question you asked. How do we create more understanding? We'll talk more about what faith does for those who are religious.
Sam and Bill, we're about at time, so I want to ask one last question that's very direct to give our audience some talking points that they can use. And I'll start with you, Sam, and then Bill, I'll kind of give you the last word before we wrap up. But the question is this: if there's someone out there listening to this or watching this conversation and they're thinking, well, this makes sense to me, this is compelling, how do I go and talk about this with someone else who maybe doesn't believe in any kind of doctrinal set of teachings with respect to faith or religion, or doesn't practice a faith or religion, or otherwise someone who's maybe a little skeptical or critical of the role of faith in public life? Is there, I'm going to ask you to try and pick one talking point very briefly that either pick in one of the sections of family education and well-being, or kind of one aggregate talking point. But if there's one key message that our audience can take and use in a conversation with someone who's maybe a little skeptical about the positive benefit of religion in public life, what's the one key thing they need to take away to use in that conversation? Sam, you first, and then Bill.
That is a great question. I don't know if I can answer it quickly. What I would say is invite them to dinner. The foundational thing for Jews in Judaism is talking. Let's have a meal together and start showing it to people. So I wouldn't give them an idea. I wouldn't give them a data point. Rather than telling them, I would show them. And I would say, welcome, come with me. And the first thing wouldn't necessarily be a service. It would be a community thing that we do. Something around a holiday, something about a festival, something about the Sabbath. That's communal, that's family focused, that's joyful, and that allows for introspection. So I know that's not exactly the right answer, or I'm not exactly answering your question, but I probably would not lead with, here's what religion does, why you should think about it. And I wouldn't tell them, I would show them, and I would say, welcome, let's take a look, see what you think. I've done that over the years, and to watch them become more engaged in these things than me is always a joy, and that happens all the time.
No, I love that. It goes back to the connection question. Bill, final word.
I think building on that, well, if I can slip an idea in addition to the one thing I will say, that is, people should read Sam's reports. He's a superb, excellent writer and researcher, and they'll learn a lot from that. But maybe I would just add, I thought that answer is exactly right. And one thing I think that people of faith could do is just to kind of express themselves as having found something that's beneficial to them. I think sometimes people find religion and religious people of faith off-putting because they feel that they're saying we have better. I don't know that that's really the claim. I think the claim is more we have something valuable, and I think the way that to introduce it is the way Sam described, by letting people come and see. I think people of faith have a lot to offer, and can learn a lot from others as well, and that interaction will be a tremendous benefit to both.
Well, we will have to leave it there. The conversation continues. I agree, Bill. Everyone can go read Sam's reports. There are 3 of them. The role of religion positively impacting family, education, and health and well-being. We'll include the links to all those in the show notes, and have a lot of great other resources on the Sutherland website on this material. But again, Bill, Duncan, Sam Abrams, thank you both for being with us on Defending Ideas.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shane.
We're going to take a final break before we leave you all with some additional talking points to close out this discussion. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back. If you're like me, listening to the evidence and anecdotes that Sam and Bill shared, you might be wondering, well, how can I use this information? What's my role in all this? Here's what I would suggest. I think the main takeaway from this research is this, that broadly speaking, it's a good thing for society to have strong religious participation as part of a vibrant, pluralistic country. And it's important to ensure that religious freedom protections remain in place, and that we have a culture that welcomes the positive role of religion in public life. A key message in support of this is, regardless of whether all Americans actively participate in a religious community, we should all be able to recognize the evidence that the presence of such communities is a net benefit for the nation. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.